Hi, I'm Bill Gaines, host of the Outdoor View, the place where we educate, connect, and learn to protect our outdoor traditions. Today, I have with me Malcolm Brookes, the uncle of Taylen Brookes, who was very unfortunately killed by a mountain lion about 3 months ago. And of course, his brother Wyatt was severely harmed, in that same incident. And Malcolm, you and I, since that happened in late March, have been working very, very closely on trying to deal with the mountain lion issues that we have here in El Dorado County. I've lived in El Dorado County for 40 years. You lived here for many, many years. I know you're in Montana now. Obviously, the rest of your family is still here. So we've got a long history of living in this place and mountain lion issues, if you will, over that time. But it just seems like the last, what, year or so, the mountain lion encounters in our county skyrocketed.
Yeah, my brother, who I'm in pretty constant communication with, lives in southern El Dorado County, and even prior to the incident, where he's Taylen and Wyatt's dad.
Right.
Even prior to the incident, he was telling me over the phone how much more frequently the cats, probably honestly over the last few years, he actually wound up he hit one with his truck in broad daylight probably 4 or 5 years ago. And when I was a kid growing up in the 80s and early 90s in that part of the county, we never saw no one ever saw lions. I mean, we would hear them screaming at night sometimes in the canyon down behind our place off Buckspar Road. But and I knew some guys who had lion and bear hounds, and they would go out and run them and tree them back in that era when it was legal to do so. So I mean, we were well aware of the fact that there were mountain lions around, but no one ever saw or encountered them anywhere near to the degree that is happening now.
There's no question that we've had a significant increase in mountain lion encounters here in the last few years. The last few months, especially after Talen's death, I mean, it kind of really brought awareness to people, and so now we're getting reports, literally multiple reports every day, not just of sightings, but of livestock being killed. I've been in close contact with the ag department of the county. I mean, the livestock encounters where cats have come in, killed goats, killed sheep, gone after horses, gone after donkeys. I mean, domestic pets. I mean, every day. We're seeing that happen every day here in this county. Didn't used to be like that before. And it's gotten to the point, it's all over Facebook, as you know, where the Mountain Lion Foundation now got their attention, right? So they're coming up tomorrow, Saturday, the 15th of June, and they're giving a presentation at the Placerville Library at 10:30 for those who want to attend, talking about living with mountain lions. I mean, what are your thoughts about that, Malcolm?
Well, I mean, I don't know when they initially announced this forum for one thing, but everybody that I am in communication with only found out about it yesterday, including myself. So it seems like it was sort of a hastily assembled thing on the front end. Uh, I do. I mean, knowing what the Mountain Lion Foundation's history and mission is, I'm sure they're very likely to downplay the boots on the ground experience of people in the region and probably try to spin a narrative explaining away or diverting attention away from the mismanagement issue, and they'll probably attempt to focus on things like habitat loss from wildfires or an explanation for increased sightings, too much residential development and encroachment into their territory. I mean, they're being the Lions' territory. That'll probably be a topic that gets picked up, and I think it's just important to address some of this stuff because so much of that narrative spin is it really doesn't hold up under scrutiny. So we just would, I would like to just give people some more information and some more data that they can work with to be able to dispel what they're going to likely be hearing at at a forum like this.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. Your family's been here for years. My wife and I and our family have been here for 40 years. in the middle parts, the rural parts of El Dorado County really haven't changed over that time. So it's not like we're moving more and more into their territory. Fact is, they're moving into our territory. I mean, and that's why the mountain lion encounters that we've seen, I mean, in the last couple of years is unprecedented. I mean,
Yeah,
like we said, every day we're hearing about livestock being lost and so forth. And the interesting thing is with Facebook and various social media, people know they know, look, if you want to protect your livestock, bring them in at night. Obviously, you keep them fenced in. I mean, they know all the precautions to take. That used to work. It used to be if you brought them in at night, locked them up somewhere safe where cats couldn't get to them. Cats are going to hunt, the Mountain Lion Foundation will tell you they're going to hunt dusk and dawn and at night, right? Very, very rarely historically were they out during the day. Well, so lock them up at night, you're good. That's not the case anymore, Malcolm. A lot of these livestock kills we're seeing are in broad daylight.
I know. Well, and the boys were attacked in broad daylight at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. In that particular case, I mean, these are two kids who grew up in the outdoors all the time, were very lion aware, followed the script perfectly in terms of how do you haze a lion away in the event of an encounter. Did exactly what they were supposed to do, and that lion behaviorally did not follow the script, and they were faced head on and attacked by the first time I believe in history that a pair of adult sized males were confronted face on, charged, and attacked. So I think the takeaway message is that because the management policies have changed over really the last 35 years in California, at this point, after generations of little to no pressure being put on the lion population, their behavior has changed as well. And they now are not operating, under the same set of, commonly understood, protocols that they used to. And I think it's important for people to realize that.
There's no question about that. I mean, historically they were ran with dogs. The mountain lion researchers and those that are collaring cats and so on and so forth, how do they collar them? They run them with dogs. It's the
Sure.
safest way to do it. Traps don't work because the lions really harm themselves when they get in a trap. And once you get them in a trap, you're never going to get them in a trap again. So the mountain lion researchers, who do they go to? They go to the houndsmen to help them with their research, right? Fact is that we haven't been able to hunt them with hounds now for quite some time, as you mentioned. Used to be they were afraid of dogs, they were afraid of people.
Yeah,
They're not anymore, which is, I think, part of the reason why they're so brazen and willing to come out and hunt livestock and even take domestic dogs, if you will,
sure.
during broad daylight.
Well, even in not only in rural areas, but increasingly in more like suburban areas. I mean, there have been, a few incidents lately where, they'll jump over a 6 foot privacy fence and take the family dog right out of the backyard. Um, but yeah, I mean, well, I guess one other thing I would really like to address here too is uh, in the hound hunting, community, hound hunting operation, there's a little too much, I think, misleading emphasis on the word hunt because that construes a lethal outcome for the pursued lion. But in the vast majority of cases in which, lions are pursued by professional hound handlers, the lion is actually, freed at the end of it. They call it tree and free. And that exercise alone of merely putting that degree of pressure on individual lions, getting them to learn to evade hound dogs and avoid humans, it has a ripple effect going forward where those cats are then much more wary about habituating to human population zones and initiating human encounters.
Right.
So
And I know when we were fighting the ban on hunting bears with dogs about a decade ago, the folks that were the proponents of that legislation would argue that you run bears with dogs, same would apply to mountain lions. You tree them, it stresses them out. The dogs are out there, killing everything in their path. All these fallacies
right.
about what's happening out there when you run cats or bears with dogs that aren't true. right? I
No.
mean, cats have been going up trees after being run by dogs for centuries. Centuries. I mean,
And probably for millennia, really, if you consider that one of the arch rivals of mountain lions historically were wolf packs. So I mean, probably however you want to describe it, biological, operating system they have was partly influenced by pursuit from wild canines. They learned very quickly that they could run up a tree, but a wolf pack couldn't. So now, I mean, in this day and age, we're in a place like California, we're lacking that, any semblance of that traditional hazing methodology. And the result of it is, again, lion behavior over the last 30 years has really drastically changed in, communities like the foothill communities.
right, right. And not only their behavior, but their numbers,
Yeah,
right? I mean,
I'm sure that's true. I mean, I think it's still like not even, nobody's even totally certain how many of them are out there because they are so evasive. It is difficult to get a truly accurate head count on them. That said, I mean, I think just to get back to the this library forum that's going to happen tomorrow at the El Dorado County Public Library in Placerville. Um, I guess what I'm hoping happens is maybe some like actual trained professional wildlife biologists and maybe fire scientists will even decide to show up to that to be able to dispel some of what I'm predicting the messaging is going to be, which really isn't, hard science based. It's more, honestly, probably more of a propaganda ploy on the part of the foundation to steer attention away from the mismanagement dimension of things and provides sort of a a whitewash or a candy coat with diversionary messaging about why the situation has devolved into what it is now.
right, right. One of the things that I'm sure that they'll talk about is, well, gee, Prop 117, which was passed on the June 1990 ballot, promoted heavily by the Mountain Lion Foundation, which deemed mountain lions as a specially protected mammal. Ballot biology, no science behind it at all. They'll probably argue, and it's true that the hunting moratorium on mountain lions actually went into place in 1971. That was Ronald Reagan. But the reasons behind that was Assembly Bill 660. The reasons behind that were, okay, let's take a pause in hunting mountain lions. We don't know how many mountain lions we've got. Let's get a count of mountain lions, and then let's get a management plan. And it was only because the department didn't know how many cats we had. They thought they had been running with the number of 600 since 1919. That was the reason that AB 660 went into play in 1971, not because Reagan thought that they were an endangered species. Oh my gosh, we got to stop hunting these things. It's like, let's base it on science, which is the way we should base our wildlife management decisions. And they didn't have the science at the time.
Right. And, part and parcel of that too is to remember that the moratorium was a lethal pursuit moratorium. There was not a moratorium for that entire, initially, 4-year mill. And then it was extended. I mean, the kill moratorium was in effect for 14 years. But for that entire 14 years, there were pursuit permits issued to houndsmen, and they could continue to legally chase and run and tree and then release lions during that. And that's part of how they ultimately were able to come up with the first semblances of a scientific count on them. So but I mean, again, just to like quickly touch on this, I mean, it's pretty easily demonstrable at this point that catch and release, if you will, free and tree preemptive lion hazing with hound dogs pretty clearly reinforces their evasive behavior of both humans and dogs. And that's like to me, that is one of the major missing links in the chain in California's lack of management.
Since like you or I or anybody else out there that I know just want to get rid of the lions. Oh, we appreciate lions like everybody else does. We just want them to respect humans and to respect, our livelihoods as well, right? I mean,
Yeah, the current situation is hardly healthy for lions either. I mean, lions are not supposed to be coming down into, populated human habitation zones, and they're not supposed to be jumping into backyards or even, enclosed livestock pens in order to get their dinner. I mean, I believe the kill rate for a lion, pursuing its natural primary prey, which would be deer, it's something like it's a 1 in 5 success rate. But once lions learn that it's nearly 100% success rate to jump into an enclosed pen or get into a chicken coop or whatever, or jump the privacy fence and grab, a domestic dog, this is not an equation that's benefiting lions either. Particularly because at some point, if we don't apply some old fashioned North American model comprehensive wildlife management and extend that to this apex predator, I hate to even say this, but on some level, people will get fed up enough to start to take things into their own hands. And that's not a good solution either, because it's also not a scientific approach to, dealing, with just you know, wildlife management is supposed to be a comprehensive thing in which all the various species, including the predatory species at the top, are factored into a scientific equation that provides a degree of balance and stability to populations. And I mean, we're not living in the Pleistocene free for all at this point. We're living in the 21st century, and we have to balance the human need to live on the same land and enjoy, the fruits of, a good life, the same way that the animal population does. So comprehensive management is really the key here. But unfortunately, the because the cat's there, not, again, as you said, not because of any scientific study that should suggest it's the case, but just because of sentimentality on the part of a voting population. There's now a specially protected status in place, but it has nothing to do with any kind of meaningful science.
that's exactly right. The other thing that we've heard on cats, and we've heard this on bears as well, is well, we've had these sweeping wildfires in California. They've lost that habitat, so they're being forced down into areas where there's higher human populations and so on and so forth. That's not true at all. Those fires, I mean, God created lightning for a reason, right? Those fires take old growth forests that had zero wildlife benefit to them, and they restore those with fresh groceries and everything for the deer, and then of course the lions feed on the deer as well. I mean, fires are a good thing for lions, are a good thing for bears, are a good thing for deer, and so on and so forth. So the fires aren't having a negative impact on cats. They're having a positive impact on cats. Those forests recover pretty quickly.
Oh yeah, they recover really quickly. And again, this is sort of a common misperception that the general public, often has. It goes back to the kind of like sort of Smokey Bear mindset. Back in the days when people just sort of like on a almost knee jerk basis just assumed that wildfires were sort of an evil, and they were, and it's understandable because when you see an old growth forest from a distance, it's visually beautiful. But when you enter that forest, you realize pretty quickly how, relatively inert and overgrown they actually are. I mean, they're not great wildlife habitat in a big picture sense. I mean, sure, there might be, squirrels and, some rodents and stuff back in there, but in terms of like a big picture functional thriving ecosystem, fire is very much a major ingredient in that. And these places do need to burn. They're designed, if you will, I mean, by nature, to periodically burn. And as soon as that happens, you almost immediately see a bunch of fresh forbs, grasses, revegetation, and it's exactly the kind of stuff that ungulates need to thrive on. Ungulates being, animals like deer, grass eaters, elk. Yeah, it took a long time, I think, for Western consciousness to wrap its head around the fact that fire actually is necessary to a healthy, thriving ecosystem. It's not the enemy. I mean, yeah, you don't really want to get into situations where you've got massive, out of control conflagrations. But the reason that's even happening right now in certain places is because we suppressed fire for so long that the fuel load is so enormous that once that powder keg goes off, I mean, it's having to do the burn work that should have been done 10 times over the last century anyway.
Right. We don't like 500,000 acre fires, but the fact is that like you look at our elk populations, for example. I mean, they're flourishing in California right now because they're moving into all these areas that are
Yep.
burned that before
Yeah.
had zero
Totally.
habitat value to them. Right.
Totally.
And the same with deer and so forth. They benefit from those fires. So fires are
Right.
actually a good thing for ungulates, which
Yeah.
is a good thing for lions. It's a good thing for bears and the critters that feed on 'em.
Yeah,
Right?
I mean, and if we, I mean, just to take the Caldor fire, as one example of, I mean, given that it's the nearest major fire complex to, where the real hot zone of negative lion encounters is happening in El Dorado and Amador counties, right? Okay, all through the foothills. So the closest recent big fire complex there was Caldor,
Right.
and just from reading people's comments online about it, they really seem to have a massive misunderstanding of like what the level of destruction was there. Yeah, it was a 220,000 acre fire complex, but it wasn't uniform across that's the perimeter of the complex. There's still plenty of intact extant habitat, which actually was benefited by the fire in the interior of that perimeter. There were a bunch of big bucks that came out of that Caldor fire zone in the last couple of years because I mean, I get it that it seems a little counterintuitive to a lot of people, but the animals that are inhabiting those areas or are proximate to those areas anyway, post burn, they immediately head in there. They don't flee the scene and permanently relocate someplace else. That's just not the way that wildlife behavior is. And now, I mean, you can look on, they've got live cameras that you can access through Cal Fire of, various Caldor, you know, um, various Caldor resuscitation, gestures that are happening right now. And as time goes on, it will, of course, reforest. But for now, what we've got is, terrific amount of like grasses, forbs, browse coming in there, and that's a wildlife magnet, not a wildlife repellent.
I may have mentioned to you, I'm a deer hunter, as and just literally weeks, not months, but weeks after the Caldor fire, the deer season opened for that zone. I had a tag, and I was out there hunting in the burn. And Malcolm, this is just a few weeks later, there was already all kinds of fresh vegetation coming up that had already been hammered pretty hard by the deer. Those areas recover quickly. It's not like we have to wait 10, 20 years
No,
for the vegetation to start to come up that the deer and other ungulates can browse on. It happens within weeks. The other thing that I've seen a lot of, on Facebook and other places is, well, you've got cameras everywhere now. Everybody's got a camera. Those cats have always been there. The fact is, you look at the numbers on the impact, the depredation on livestock, domestic pets, and so forth, skyrocketing. If you talk to the county or if you talk to the sheriff with the 911 calls and so forth, I mean, that's hard data. I mean, that we didn't have before, that's happening now, cameras are not, right?
right. Well, I mean, that's another fallacy about this. I mean, because people like my brother, and there are lots of them in that region, they've been using game cameras and trail cameras for the last 30 years. Okay, So this idea that there's suddenly some brand new proliferation of camera technology and that's the only reason people are capturing them. I mean, even that just doesn't hold up under scrutiny. Um, and beyond that, just anecdotally, when I was, a teenager in the mid 80s, in El Dorado County, if somebody saw a mountain lion in broad daylight, it would make the newspaper because it was such a rarity. And I mean, but almost, and I remember this. I was still living in the Placerville area in 1990 when 117 passed. Within, say, a year to 2 years, the number of people who were starting to see lions, just glimpses of them even in broad daylight, was just going up and up and up. It didn't take very long at all for management policy to change and start to have, an observable effect on the behavior of the lions themselves. Now we're 35 years and many generations down the road, and it seems like, the road we've gone down is getting increasingly, more dangerous, frankly.
Right. And there's no question about that. And the numbers show that when it comes to livestock. Not only that, but we talked about, the attacks on humans, a lot of the folks that are pro Mountain Lion Foundation, others say, well, they didn't attack humans. They attack humans. I mean, you look at the department's own numbers, Taylen and Wyatt aside, I mean, those numbers have gone through the roof,
Totally.
since, in the last like 5, 6 years since the new
Yeah.
depredation policy and so forth has gone into place.
Well, yeah, since 2020, when the essentially unilateral three strikes depredation permit policy was put into effect, the number of attacks on humans, and the vast majority of them have been on children. None of them lethal, except for Taylen, largely because there was enough of an adult human presence nearby to sort of diffuse the situation. But a bunch of, I think it's something like there have been 9 attacks on humans, documented attacks on humans since 2020 when the three strikes policy was implemented in the state of California. So in a 4-year period, you've got 9 attacks, one lethal, that being my nephew. Prior to 2020, when that policy changed internally, there were a dozen recorded attacks between, I think, 1996 and 2019. So we've got approaching the number in a 4-year period with this tipping point of the policy change in 2020. We're approaching the number that existed for 25 years previously on documented attacks.
Yeah, exactly. So we talked about,
Argue.
documented attacks on livestock going through the roof in the last few years. Same thing is happening on humans, right? I
Yeah,
mean, so I mean, that those are just facts, and those are the Department of Fish and Wildlife numbers
I
when
know.
it comes to the
I know.
human
I
encounters.
know. These are CDFW's numbers that we're utilizing here. Um, Now, in terms of like, will lions ever target a human as a food source? I would certainly have to say that when they're going after the young kids, that's got to be prey drive that's triggering that. Has to be. I mean, they're the right size. It's not so large of a target that the target might. And now that's what's bizarre about Wyatt and Taylen, but they were confronted face on. I mean, that almost doesn't that looks almost more like territorial behavior out of the lion versus prey drive behavior. But as a rule, when they go after young kids or a jogger or a mountain biker, there's a lot of movement and the attack comes from behind because it's the prey drive kicking in.
Right, right. And I've seen some people again on Facebook saying, well, that was a mother cat protecting her kittens and so on and so forth. Certainly was not the case with Wyatt and Taylen, right? I mean,
Definitely.
and like the bikers and so forth, I mean, they're riding through on a little dirt trail or whatever. I mean, has nothing to do with that. I mean, these are just cats that are out there hunting. We're seeing things happen on a day-to-day basis that are unprecedented. It'll be interesting to see what the Mountain Lion Foundation presents tomorrow, because it's not a one size fits all. Oh, well, here's the misinformation. Da, 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 da. I mean, somebody from out of town, can't come in here and tell us, here's what's going on in El Dorado County, and here's how you have to adapt to it. It's like, wait a minute, what's happening here is unprecedented. We're living with it day by day, and it's almost insulting to have somebody come and tell us, here's, really what's going on that isn't here, and doesn't know the history, and doesn't know what we're confronting today, right?
Sure. Yeah. And I think that's totally true. I mean, again, I mean, I would, really just encourage particularly anybody who has a background in wildlife management and wildlife biology, who actually understands the science behind all of this stuff. If a person like that, has the time and inclination to show up at this meeting and just be available to present, a sort of educated, comprehensive counter to anything that, is potentially there more for propaganda purposes than, actual legitimate information that would be helpful to people.
Yeah, what I hope happens is I mean, they're coming here to try to educate us on mountain lion behavior and history and so on and so forth, which is fine. But I think it's an opportunity for us to educate them on what's happening here and in some other neighboring counties, so that the Mountain Lion Foundation can perhaps maybe adjust their goals and how they're working with mountain lions, and how they're dealing with communities like ours that are seeing, a much enhanced increase in encounter. We should be partnering on fixing this problem. We don't want to get rid of cats. They don't want to get rid of cats, but we need to deal with the problems that we're having, and we should be partnering on this, and going, toe to toe on it. That's my
Totally.
thoughts.
I completely agree with that. And I think that there are, ways to, arrive at a compromise with this in which there are effective, management strategies, put into place. I mean, again, tree and free hound, non-lethal pursuit permits would be really ideal. It might be complicated, to quickly get, something like that into position. Beyond that, definitely a return to, and this is achievable immediately, a return to the pre-2020 depredation permit issuance policy as outlined in 117 itself. And in other words, get rid of the three strikes thing, get rid of the bureaucratic loopholes that people are having to jump through in order to, in order to achieve a depredation permit per the terms of 117, which is what the voters voted on in the first place back in 1990. So that's something that can be done. Beyond that, again, I guess just to briefly return to this meeting or forum at the public library. I mean, I'm not, I don't know, if but part of me thinks that it might be really critical to have a whole lot of concerned citizens show up at this, just to, you know, demonstrate the numbers in this area who are either actually actively having, negative lion problems themselves, or are just hyper aware at this point of the possibility of such. And I guess the thing that also would just like to sort of caution people against is try to arm yourselves with, if you do choose to go to a meeting like this, try to arm yourself with as many facts as possible and keep as cool a head as possible, because I can also see, I can see that people are passionate enough, angry enough in many cases, that I can see it devolving into more of a shouting match that is potentially going to be counterproductive. And I don't want to see that happen either. But at the same time, I mean, I think it's important for, organizations like the Mountain Lion Foundation. I mean, it's a, pretty influential organization that, has had a lot of outsized clout on policymaking and, relative to this issue. I think it's important that they actually get a notion of what it's like for people living in a region, a lion proximate region like El Dorado County or, any of the foothills regions at this point.
No, and I've had a history of working with the Mountain Lion Foundation, for the past 30 plus years, pretty much since right after Prop 117. But there's a lot of things we partner on. Budget issues, for example, where we're looking for dollars for habitat for deer, mountain lions, and other things. And we partner on that kind of stuff. And I'm hoping that we can partner, as I mentioned, on finding some balance and managing mountain lions, trying to keep them, out of the public space at the same time, provide them with what they need. Because I think there is some middle ground on this that I think will solve our problem at the same time and help address the Mountain Lion Foundation's goals as well.
Again, if you do decide to attend this meeting, try to go in there armed with with as much like actual science-based data as possible, and keep a cool head. So,
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. Well, Malcolm, appreciate having you on today. It's been a pleasure working with you for the past few months. We're working on some other stuff in this space that we'll do some future interviews on. So people stay tuned because we'll be talking maybe next week, talk about, some of the policy issues that we're working on and some of the other things. We're not just sitting idle on this stuff. We're trying to make some positive changes.
definitely.
So Malcolm, thank you for coming on today. Really appreciate your time. We'll be talking with you here in the next few days on some other issues related with mountain lions. So I look forward to doing that and just appreciate you being on.
Yeah, thank you, Bill, for having me. I like you say. I mean, it was kind of unfortunate circumstances that brought us together on this, but I mean, I just really appreciate the hard work that you've put in, and I think we're gonna make a difference eventually.
I think we will, and I look forward to continuing to partner with you on that. And thank you to our viewers for watching the Outdoor Review, the place where we educate, connect, and learn to protect our outdoor traditions. Check us out on Facebook, check us out on YouTube, and at our website at www.theoutdoorview.org.